Welcome to Digital After Dark with your hosts, Matt and Andrew.
Hello, and welcome back to another Digital After Dark. This is episode 12. I'm Andrew, and as always, I'm here with Matt.
Hello.
Today, we want to talk about implementation strategies. But, you know what, it's been a while. So, Matt, how has things been?
Oh, well, we've had the summer. It's definitely not summer anymore. It's getting quite cool and quite rainy now, although possibly we might be in for another heat wave. I have been to France, which was very nice and very hot, with the wife and kids, and a very, very long drive. So if you've ever driven 1,000 miles with children in the car, you'll know what I'm talking about. Young children in particular. And then we're in the kitchen, and it's full of boxes. You can't really see because it's a blurred out background, but it's full of boxes because the kitchen is being replaced next week. So we're storing the new kitchen. So that's very exciting. And then work-wise, anything. I mean, loads has been going on with work, but too much for me to, when there's so many things that are happening that I'm trying to pick out one thing that is of particular interest. I'm sure it will come back to me as we continue to talk. How about you?
Well, one, I was going to say, it was not just a car drive for you. It was also a car drive and then driving the car onto the train to go over the channel to France.
It was. And then driving the car for sort of 3 hours on the wrong side of the road, or the right side of the road, depending on literally the right side of the road.
I was going to say, it all depends on perspective at that point. No, it was a interesting summer, a lot warmer than what you would expect, and severely dry. So it's interesting seeing the rain coming and not letting up. So it's one of those things. The week has been very busy. There's so much going on, and then the rain comes, and it's just raining and raining, and it just brings your mood down even more. Like, I'm busy. It's raining. There's nothing that is bringing my joy up in my life. So you're like, if you was just more sunny, let more of that energy in.
I don't know. I'm one of those annoying people that I quite enjoy the rain. I like this time of year.
I prefer rain over heat, agreed. But it doesn't help out with the mood, because then, especially when you start going into winter and you forget what that big yellow thing in the sky is.
So I vaguely recall it was some sort of balloon or something. I don't know. It's gone. It's gone now anyway. We'll get it back in about 6 months.
No, it's going to be another 9 months. We're in summer again. Overall, it was a good summer. I want to talk about implementation strategies because I saw a post over the summer where they talked about, should you capture something just because of why not? Or should everything always have a reason? And it made me really think about what should the implementation strategies be when it comes to digital collection and marketing. Because I do think with businesses, they do have a different approach when it comes to a marketing pixel versus capturing data in analytics. So I thought it was a very good, interesting conversation. And then once we're done with that, we're going to talk about what's been happening in the news, because there has been a lot that's happened recently.
It's the first time we've done a topical section, so we'll see how it goes.
Well, I would say that we've done a lot of topical ones, but it was the whole subject. This is going to be the first time that we do a special section just about for what's going on in the news.
And by news, we mean the digital marketing and analytics news.
Definitely not world politics and everything else that's going on in the world.
We don't touch on that.
Well, at least not on a podcast.
Exactly.
What are the implementation strategies for capturing data? So, first, I do believe everything needs to have a business requirement. If there is no business requirement, why are we talking about what needs to be captured? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, what was the general view on the post that you saw? You mentioned that you'd seen a post, and what was the post advocating for collecting everything or advocating for being selective? And then what was the view in the comments?
This was several weeks ago. I just remember thinking this was something that'd be fun to talk about, because there are many new tools coming out where it is codeless, where they just say, "Look, just put it on here, and we'll capture everything, including the kitchen sink." And then there's other people which they say, "No, you need to capture the bare minimum, and then just keep it at that," because what you're trying to measure is performance. So I wanna look at where what should the strategy be? Because to me, I don't think it's either one of those. I don't think it needs to be the bare minimum. And after Sky, I'm definitely never going to be in the capture everything in the kitchen sink again.
I think underpinning it is, for me, well, okay. So if I was to step back probably a year, it's not even been that long. I would say probably a year ago, I would very much have been on the side of keep your implementations minimal. So keep your data layer to MVP, figure out what your primary KPIs are that are going to drive your business, that are going to deliver value, and then do data collection that aligns with those. And then once you have exhausted all of the value from that, which undoubtedly would take you some time, you then expand upon it. But to begin with, do MVP, because I feel that businesses often underestimate just how much value they'll get from the bare minimum, and actually how much effort goes into and time goes into analyzing and leveraging the data. Even when we've spoken about like real-time leveraging, but getting the use cases set up to understand what to leverage and then setting up the pipelines to leverage it, even if then the process is automated, the process of getting all of that set up in the first place can be quite lengthy and can take a lot of effort. So yeah, probably a year ago, I would have been very much along the side of just collect absolutely what you know you need to deliver value, and then yeah, expand upon it at a later date if you need more. Um, and there are reasons for that, and we can get into that. But I guess what's your view?
If we were to go back before joining Lee Prison, I would say I was nowhere near as strict on that. I would always want to focus on what was the KPIs and what were the trigger metrics that can build up to those KPIs. So what would help enhance the KPI metrics to understand what is leading to those changes. But especially more recently, I have been focusing more on not just what the KPIs are, because there is more to the site than just that. But what are the value that will be driving the decision for doing this? What could the company do with this data that can make an impact on their bottom line to justify the cost of the time it is going to be to create the scripts for this, getting the developers to implement it, adding the technical debt, and then the additional costs in the server calls. So
Yeah, I think that was always, and again, this is why I say up until about a year ago, and then we'll flip things to talk about some of the new tools that are coming out that I think change that narrative somewhat. But that is precisely right. It's I always felt that when we were at Sky, and then since joining Loop Horizon and dealing dealing with different businesses on a day-to-day basis, that there's never enough consideration given to the cost of data collection. So, I want everything, and I want to collect absolutely everything, and I may or may not use it. And I think that's one thing that's very rarely considered, which is, well, actually, let's say I'm developing a data layer and I'm trying to collect absolutely everything. There's a cost from a development perspective to build that in the first place. Then there's an ongoing cost of technical debt to maintain it. But there's a real cost in terms of like just network requests, the amount of data being pulled, and the different backend systems that you're pulling it from, and how long it takes to process the data once it lands. So, like for example, um, if I'm pulling data from a data layer and maybe I want to process that data server side before I deliver it to the website or to the app because I want the same data object on web or app, so I'm going to process it on the server. What's the impact on delivery speed of doing that for the more data that I add into this thing? Or if I go then the flip side and I push the raw data back onto a browser, for example, I'm going to need some sort of processing mechanism in the browser. So what's the impact on the page load of getting the browser to process it? And trying to get businesses to understand that actually there's a direct cost to any data collection from a development and a maintenance, but also from a site speed and performance and revenue perspective. And then to try to have a sensible conversation about how much this new data point that you want to collect, how much value does it deliver versus how much cost does it incur to generate and maintain. That's been a conversation I've been trying to get businesses to have for the last 5 years. And that's what I was saying, up until about a year ago, that would always be my default position. And added to that fact, and something that is still relevant even when we talk about some of the new tools that we're going to talk about, the more data you have, the harder it is to use. So aside from anything else, let's say you've got loads of data and it's hard to maintain and it's costly, but the fact that it's hard to maintain means that bits of it will be inaccurate, which erodes trust. And it also means that going into your analysis tools or going into your data warehouse and trying to understand which of the 1,000 data points that have been collected is the correct one to use to generate the metric and the dimension and the KPI that you're trying to generate becomes exponentially harder the more data that there is. It's you can't see the wood for the trees. So having too much data is costly, but it also renders the good data kind of useless because you don't know what you should use and what you shouldn't, like, because the documentation gets out of hand and no one's going to read it anyway. It just becomes, yeah, it's very, very difficult. So I've always been like, focus on what you actually need.
There was an analogy that I loved before where it said, you got to think of your data collection like a closet. You can only put so much in there until sooner or later you have to remove something to make sure that you can store more.
Or pay for a bigger closet.
Yeah. But let's say that even you pay for a bigger closet. So now you're stuffing more clothes in there. And now think about the analysts who are trying to go and use it. So even if the data was absolutely perfect, you're now trying to find that needle in the haystack. You're trying to find that one outfit. So you're going through the closet, you're looking for it, and now you're spending more time trying to find that data. So by collecting more data, you're actually having an impact on the analyst and their speed to actually get the insight and the analysis out because they're having data paralysis. There's just too much there for them to handle.
Well, exactly. And then, which is why I've got 2 audits running at the moment that are doing exactly this, which is looking at the data that businesses have, and trying to understand, like, a solution design document with 500 individual dimensions in it, let's say, or 800 or 1,000, and going through them and trying to score them from effort to generate and value delivered, and then pare that down to only the ones that are actually delivering benefit and aren't causing immeasurable impact on efficiency and the end user experience.
Yeah. And I don't know if you remember, as Sky, we had the log analysis Power BI dashboard where we would take out all the data from Site Catalyst and actually see which dimensions were customers running, what metrics were they using, who's using it, how often is it being used. And I think that is something from an Adobe point of view, which is really missed since they moved to Analysis Workspace. And don't get me wrong, Analysis Workspace is amazing. I love the tool. But we've now lost the ability to understand what dimensions are people using, what metrics are they using. So now that we don't have this, we can't go in and prune the data and remove things that people aren't using and help out in reducing that closet space.
Definitely. But then, as we've touched upon, this was potentially my attitude about a year ago, maybe 6 months ago. So what's changed? And well, go on. You talk about a couple of the tools, and then I'll expand upon why it might have changed the picture somewhat.
Well, I know before we started this conversation, I said that I don't think you and I are going to be too much out of step. But I think this is where you and I are going to be out of step, and this may go in a little bit more of a longer conversation because you're going to be talking about the same type of tools that we saw at Measure Camp last year, where you can take a no code, put it onto the website, and they will start capturing all of the data for you without needing to add anything else in. And I'm really curious where your perspective is going to be on this because it still, for me, goes against my initial attitude where you're capturing too much information. So it reminds me like of Tea Leaf back in the day at Sky, where it was a network call where they were capturing everything that was happening on there. They could see what was happening on the page, see what it looked like, where people are moving to. They don't need to add any more additional code because it was on the server. They had one analyst who was using it, and I remember it would take him literally a quarter. Every quarter, he had analysis done because he finally got enough information where he could do something with it. So I'm actually going to let you run this one because I'm curious on where you're going to go with these tools.
Well, I think there's a few considerations. So the first consideration is that, and one thing we didn't actually touch on with sheer volume of data collection is the cost of storage. So it used to be, I think you kind of touched on it with server calls and things like that. And, you know, any analysis tool that charges on ingress of data. But actually, with with cloud and with these huge server centers, the cost of data storage has dropped dramatically. So that's one thing that's changed. So you can do this single script that scrapes everything. So I guess my first thing would be, I'm going to caveat that scrapes everything. It doesn't, and we'll get onto that in a bit. But if we take these things at face value, no code, bollocks, no. It is code. It's just one code library that then pulls in a massive additional code library that then scrapes everything. But it means that you're not having to track individually. It's going to read from the DOM, and it's going to pick up interactions with every element automatically. And part of the reason why we're able to do that now is because cost of storage has dropped. Now, the good news is that then if you look at those development costs to build your data layer or to implement individual tracking on individual elements, that goes away. You don't have those data costs anymore. And therefore, the ongoing maintenance and technical debt also goes away for the development team. But if you collect everything, still have to do the due diligence on deciding which of everything is important. So you still have to do the analysis of the data and understanding which of these everything data points are going to be key. That is now moved into your analytics implementation or your analyst team. So you're not changing the amount of work, or you're probably reducing the amount of work somewhat, but you're taking it away from your dev team and you're moving it into your analyst team instead, who then has to do the configuration that would have previously been done by your dev team. And it's probably less, but it's still, there's a significant amount of work. But what's interesting with that is the problems that you would then have. So the thing about development teams, and I'm a big fan of dev teams, but there's usually lots and lots and lots of them. They're not necessarily data experts because they've got lots of different jobs that they have to do. And there's lots of different kinds of developers. There's web developers, there's iOS and Android, and and the various different languages that work on those platforms, C++ and JavaScript, and any number of different kind of developer. And they're not going to be data experts, and some of them are going to be better, and some of them are going to be worse. And so you're going to get varying degrees of quality and maintenance of your data platform. Whereas if you have an automated system to pull everything and scrape everything, and then the maintenance of that sits with your analysis team or your implementation team, it is their job to be data experts. And so you could argue that there's a data quality improvement from doing things in this way. And again, with a caveat, but I'll kind of let you speak there because I can see you wanting to chip in, but that's kind of where, if you take the sort of cost and ongoing maintenance and data quality issues of trying to create a data layer and hook onto individual data points, there is an argument that doing it this way and collecting everything and allowing your analysis team to pick the things that are important in a structured data model that is the same everywhere gets around those, and you get better quality data. So I will open that up to you. What do you think?
I'm going to disagree on this one because when we're talking about scraping, we're talking about scraping from the DOM and from the HTML and the attributes on the page. Am I correct? So if the page goes through a significant change, would that also not mean that the structure of the data now has gone through a significant change?
Yes. And then you may be in a position where you would need to amend or change the data. I had this exact conversation. So with a vendor, because that was precisely, well, my point was slightly different to yours, but and I'll give you the answer that they gave me. My point was this: website A and website B have a completely different DOM. If I am a company and I have website A, and I'm a company and I have website B, and they're separate brands, but I want to do connected data between the two of them, even if I have a connected ID, because they are on a different platform and they have a completely different DOM, how does that work? How do I get consistent data between the two of them? And essentially the answer is that they have a standard data model and they use secret source. it's the best I can come up with, a black box of some description, but essentially there is something that takes that information and standardizes it so that even if the DOM changes, or even if you're dealing with two separate platforms, there is a standardization layer that takes that and standardizes it before you then look at it. That's the response I was given. I have not yet seen it in action.
And that's where I think I would be very bothered by it. So there was a client that I was working with where they wanted to bring on a marketing pixel. And this marketing pixel was acting in a very similar way where we're talking about now, where you take one script, put it on, and it will go through and it will do all of this magic data collection. Now, whenever it was originally given to this client, they were telling, oh, it's just going to be the page URL and the IP address and some things to collect what cookie ID is coming from. And going through the JavaScript, which was thousands of lines long, you realize that there's actually event listeners on there. And they had a lot more data collection than what they were portraying. And I'm trying to keep it very vague right now on purpose to make sure I don't call out anyone in particular on this one. But we did push back on this, and this is their documentation, which once again doesn't reference any of these event listeners or any of these additional things. And I talked to one of their people, and they even mentioned, well, actually, I didn't even know this event listeners even existed in this code. And then you talk to someone else, and go, oh yeah, it is there, but we don't use it. And then you talk to someone else, and goes, actually, no, it is there, and we do use it. And you could never get a clear answer on what it was. And this brought a lot of confusion within the client to the point where they opted not to go with this JavaScript because of security and the time that it would take to try to get this pushed through, because it's going to have to be investigated by all their internal security teams. So
This is the other thing. This and sorry to jump in, but this is exactly right. So, and we can talk about another aspect of this now. So I guess to recap, yes, if it works as advertised, it could solve data quality and efficiency and cost of maintenance issues. If it works as advertised, it could work and continue to work with dev updates and cross DOM. But to your point, it seems like it didn't work as advertised, because it was doing things that weren't in the documentation and that the people that you were talking to didn't know about it. And that's a pretty common theme. And actually, Compliance and data privacy is another concern. Because if it's scraping everything, let's say you've got a card payment page. How do you make sure that it doesn't scrape those card details? Just a question. You can do, but then every page, every user, every permutation. So I think there's a risk there. To your point, it was collecting things that even the people you were talking to didn't know that it was doing, and you got multiple different answers. So I think there's a security risk there. But the other thing that a lot of these tagless, codeless solutions, I mean, even in the name, they're not tagless and they're not codeless. So even there's a lie straight away. But the other thing that they often claim to be is cookieless. That's the big thing as well, cookie-free tracking. I've spoken to 2 clients about this, and who have been sold on the cookieless idea. And have you come across this? Have you come across this cookieless tracking thing?
Yeah, this particular tool, when they originally said that there was only like 1 or 2 cookies, but there was actually 12 plus infinite amount of local storage and cookies as well. But they did have a cookieless option as well.
So this is, yes, there are 2 vendors that I've come across who have claimed to be cookieless and have a huge amount of information on their websites about being cookieless. Vendor 1 uses their own platform on their website. So I went on their website, didn't grant consent, went and had a look at the network requests, and could see a first-party cookie being returned in the network requests with an identifier that was persisting for 400 days. So they did use cookies, and I then passed that back to the client and said, challenge them on this. And then the second vendor also said that they were cookieless and actually had a case study for a client in Germany who had deployed their cookieless tracking. Well, guess what? I went onto the case study for this compliance case study, looked at the network request, and lo and behold, before consent, there was a cookie being returned with an identifier in it. So both of the cookieless solutions that I've been asked to vet were not cookieless. They were returning cookies, and they were tracking data. The whole thing about it being cookieless is it's a bit like Google's advanced consent mode. It doesn't set a cookie, but it tracks, and then you can use machine learning to tie the information back together again afterwards. At least with Google advanced consent mode, it doesn't set a cookie. Both of these vendors that I checked were setting cookies before consent. And the other thing was that one of the vendors, they were talking about GDPR. And it's GDPR probably isn't. I mean, it is relevant, as we're going to get to later with like the Hanover Ruling and things like that. It is relevant, but it's e-privacy and PECR. That's what you're talking about. You're talking about reading and writing data to a client's device pre-consent, and you're setting a cookie when you're telling people that you didn't. But the point is, and the thing I sent to the second client is, they were going to deploy this tool outside of their tag manager before consent because they had been told that it was GDPR and e-privacy compliant and that didn't use cookies. And then I go and look at one of the case studies in Germany, which is much stricter than the UK, and lo and behold, it's returning a cookie in the network request.
Yeah. I mean, the solution that I'm talking about, I will admit, they did not have a single cookie that could drop in this scenario. But they did drop 2 files, which did have all the same information that the cookie have. So it's almost like saying, I don't want a cookie, but instead you just got a very crispy pancake.
with little bits of chocolate in it.
We at least hope it's chocolate.
Chocolate chip pancake. But yes, so I think that's the other thing is very much, it depends whether you take them at face value. At face value, there may be a flipping of the script, because I really like it. I like the idea of it. I like the idea of flipping the script random rather than relying on development teams diffuse development teams with varying skill sets and levels of experience with data collection, you can just collect everything, and then your data team, your analysis team can then figure out the valuable bits because storage is no longer an issue. Like I like all of that, but I don't like the compliance issues, and I don't like the the idea that, oh yes, it'll be fine if you make a development update and you can have two completely separate DOMs. Like, does that really work? Really?
But my even growing question is it even compliant if you are able to capture everything? Because isn't there also a guidance that you're only supposed to capture what is actually necessary for your business?
Yeah, yeah,
So if
perfectly
you are
valid point.
capturing everything, it's not compliant.
Even if you're discarding much of it afterwards. And
This
the
part,
other
you still
sorry,
captured
go on.
it.
Go on.
Like,
Well, yeah, exactly. No, I mean, even if you are discarding it afterwards, it's a valid point because you're still capturing it. Um, and then one other thing I will raise about one of the vendors that we spoke to, because the other thing is that and another concern that I raised is that not everything is available in the DOM. A lot of information that you might need might be business level information. So things like you display a product to a customer, and there are various different potential offers or various different insurance policies or whatever that go along with this product, different variants and things like that. And the user doesn't need to see all of that. You might pick and choose one of those variants of the product to show to them, but the information is valuable to know what was available, what was shown, what wasn't shown, in order to understand what performs better. Now, that's business level information. That's never going to be available in the DOM. The only way you're going to get that information is from some sort of product or offers back-end system that's going to return that information. So what do you do if you're just doing one tag and DOM scraping to get that kind of information, CRM data, order management data, product data that isn't available in the DOM? Well, the answer was, oh yeah, we can scrape your data layer as well. So it's like, oh, well, we still need a data layer then. Fair enough.
Exactly. And I'm presuming then you have to provide it with what data layer object you're using to be able to scrape it.
Yeah, of course, you can tell it. And look, yeah, and I'm being kind of dismissive with it. Actually, it opens up a really interesting opportunity if you can get around the compliance issues and everything else that we've spoken about, because it does afford an opportunity for you to take a huge amount of weight off your dev team, and then your data layer becomes very, very small. Your data layer is tiny. It just delivers these packets of information that aren't available in the DOM, which means that all your dev team has to do is just maintain this very, very small data layer, which is a lot easier and much less prone to data quality issues and things like that, because it's a lot easier to manage. And then the rest of everything else gets scraped off the DOM, and then you chuck it all to your analysts, and you let them figure out what's valuable. So I think the promise of it is very, very interesting, but the reality of it, I think, is where that's where the detail is.
And with this scraping and sending off the data, I'm going to presume the data is being sent off to their servers, or is it being sent off to one of your own servers?
In all of the cases that I have seen so far, it is going to their servers, and then there is a varying degree of pass-through speed. So one vendor passes the data through within a few milliseconds. Another vendor passes it through within a minute or two. It's kind of that thing. So it's going to their servers, and then you can pass it through to yours. But I didn't see anything. I think one of them. I think one of them you could host it on your servers. That was more of a compliance-based version. It was a vendor that had come from a compliance background, and you could self-host if you wanted to.
Okay. So even with these that are going to another vendor's servers, them scraping the data layer, I guarantee you there are data layers that we work with where we wouldn't want them to scrape everything. So I do hope that they would also have the ability to say, you know what, take everything but this particular variable in the
Yeah.
object.
And I think that's the thing, the devil's in the detail. And a lot of these tools are being sold in every case that I've come across, in every single case that I've come across, they're being sold as being tag free, no effort to implement, no effort to maintain, cookieless, so you can load them before consent. And that's the selling point. That's always how they're being sold. And every single time when you challenge those different aspects of it, it turns out that it's kind of cookieless. It's kind of tag free. It's almost this. It's all, and it's so it is. It's the devil's in the detail. Is exactly right.
Yeah, because I mean, before Loop Horizon, I came from a financial institute where I guarantee you having this cookieless solution would sound very interesting. But at the same time, could you imagine the amount of hurdles that we'd have to jump through to try to say, yeah, let's put the script on and it's going to scrape everything off the page. First thing that's going to come out of their mouth is not going on to the online banking section.
I think again, one of the vendors that we spoke to, they were from the banking sector, so I think there are ways of getting around it. Where they in particular they'd come from a background of they've been developed as a compliant tracking solution, and that was their starting point, and then they built up from there. So I think there probably are vendors out there that are doing it right, albeit that was the vendor that was setting cookies before consent. Then again, they all were, so
Yeah.
that's no real difference. I think you could probably switch it off. It's just that they had chosen not to for whatever reason. But I think there are ways of doing it, because this particular vendor, when you looked at their client list, it was primarily banking sector.
And that's just strange because, like, even with the vendor that I was talking about before, where was opted not to go with their universal event JavaScript, they even talked about how they had financial services that are using this. And coming from there, I guarantee you, at least the company I work for would not have allowed that code to go anywhere close to the website, even in the non-secured environments, just because the amount of things that came out of their control was just too great. And that's where I think many companies will have the problem with. It is nice to think about the benefit that you can have from releasing some of this control, but that control is also what gives people the confidence that they are compliant.
Well, and also, compliance aside, but the confidence that the data is what you think it is. And I do think that a problem with a black box transformation layer, for example, that can consolidate one DOM and another DOM and try to put out the same data, is you're always going to be wondering, does that really mean the same thing from one platform to another? Because I don't know, because I wasn't involved in the code. But anyway, I guess wrapping this up a little bit, um, a very, very interesting potential. So kind of wrapping it up anyway, like wrapping it up in a bow. I think it's a really interesting idea. I mean, because we were talking about implementation strategy. If these tools fulfill on the promise that they claim to, and like we all have questions about that as we've explored, but if they do, it potentially changes the model. Really does. So I think one to watch. I'm certainly not going to dismiss them entirely, but I do think that the old adage of collect what's valuable and understand what it's costing you, I'm going to stick with that for now because that makes sense.
And I think I'm going to be the exact same way. We have worked with vendors in the past where they had all these great promises of what their tools can do. And with one of them, I believe that they are just now starting to actually meet that demand, actually meet what they actually said that they could have done a decade ago. But it took them 10 years to get here. Because when you look into it, you could have done it 10 years ago, but it was definitely being held up by duct tape.
I know what you mean. Um, yeah, I mean, what's the saying? If it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. And I think whenever I've heard from clients about these tools, and I thought that sounds too good to be true. And every one of the claims that I have investigated has proven too good to be true because it wasn't true. I think one of the vendors, one of the things that irked me as well was I went on one of the vendor websites and they did a comparison between their tool and GA4 as like a primary competitor. And I think of the bullet points that they had about GA4, about maybe one or two of them were actually true, and the rest of them were just nonsense. It was like, no, it doesn't do that. Yes, GA4 does do that, and so does your platform does it, great, but so does GA4. And like, I'm not trying to be like a GA4 fanboy, but don't lie. Don't like put stuff up on your website on a comparison table and then lie about the capabilities of your competitor. People are gonna know. They're gonna look at it and go, yeah, it does. What are you talking about?
Yeah, I hate it whenever that happens where they say that the competitor cannot do something, but you can clearly go, actually, yeah, I can. Like, but then again, let's be honest. I'm going to go back to Sky. I'm always going to remember this, where the Google actually came in and they were trying to say, well, no, our session expires based off of this. And you know me from Sky. I was not very big on GA at the time, but I knew exactly how their session works. I was like, actually, no, it expires based off of this, 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 this. I started listing them all out. And once we went on break, I literally pulled up their own documentation and said, here is your own documentation that says it.
Yeah, don't lie, or don't send people to represent your product who don't know about it. But it does. The reason I bring that up and that comparison list that I saw is it just calls into question every single other claim that they make. Because like if your comparison list is a lie, our product does this and this product doesn't do it, and like I'm looking at it going, yeah, it does, it does do that. Then you go, well, this claim that you've got to be tag free, do I believe you? No, because you lied about this. This claim to be cookieless, do I believe you? No, because you lied about this. Be truthful.
I mean, not to make this a philosophy podcast, but I always like saying, in God we trust. Everyone else bring data and documentation.
What's the one in God we trust but cut the cards? Anyway,
Yeah.
Oh, trust everyone but cut the cards. What's in the news?
Let's go to the news. So there is actually a much longer list than what I was originally planning, but I thought that we should cover off as much of these as possible. So first things first, because it's coming out this month, iOS 26.
So I had a question about this because I looked at my iOS updates. Is 26 the beta version, or is 26 now moving into production? Because I could upgrade to 26, but it was the dev version.
So whenever you go in your iPhone or any Apple product, you have the ability to keep to the current version, or you could go onto their beta version. So iOS 26 right now for customers will be in the beta for the testing.
So
But
when's it production?
so it's supposed to come in production at the end of the month.
Because that was weird. Because I went in and looked, and it was like iOS 18 was like the latest version that I was on. So it's jumped from 18 to 26.
Yes, it has.
All right.
So I'm going to take it that you have not heard their logic behind this.
I haven't. Please do tell. I'm all agog.
So let's think like this. We're currently on iOS 18, but the latest phone, if I recall correctly, is 17. So iPhone 17. And then you have Apple Watch, which is, I think they're coming out with their 11th version, but yet it's the Apple iWatch 16.
Oh.
So there's a lot of confusion of the naming convention when it came to this. So for now on, they are going to be calling it based off of the next year. So it's coming out in 25, but it's to serve in the year of 2026.
I see. I see.
And now they're just going to standardize that across all of their operating systems. So Mac, iPad, watch, phone.
Fair enough. Anyway, I've digressed and derailed the conversation. But why are we interested in iOS 26, Andrew?
So the reason that we're interested in it is they are now expanding on their privacy for Safari private browsing. And they're now going to be removing the GCLID, which, for starters, I hate the name GCLID because it just sounds very provocative. But this is
Why?
let's not go there.
No.
We're gonna keep it somewhat family friendly. So with this is what Google uses to be able to link between their analytics and the Google ads and everything else, so you can tie them back together.
And to be clear, it has always been removed. Well, not always, but it has been removed for the last year or so in private browsing and from iOS apps. So if you tried to click something with a GCLID or a Meta Facebook/ID, it would have been stripped if you were in private browsing or if you were in one of the iOS apps. But now it's going to be everything.
I actually have it printed up. So, because it's going to be now part of the advanced tracking protocol.
So it's in all Safari basically.
All Safari and all Safari base, which means pretty much all of your iPhone. Which,
So we're talking about 40 to 45% of the internet.
yep. Now there are workarounds. So go on LinkedIn, you'll be able to see workarounds for all of these. Which it just means Apple's going to come up with ways of getting around these workarounds.
Yes.
But at the same time, I'm just going to slam Apple for a second. I love your products. I love the fact that you keep things consistent, which means when it comes to actually getting an app, it just works. But damn it, and I don't swear often, but I don't need you to be my parent. You don't need to protect me from everything.
So we're losing GCLID. It's not just GCLID, it's any what do you think, like unique user identifier that's being passed through in a URL string?
I don't think it's everything because they did mention that there are other pixels which are not being impacted.
Meta will be impacted though, won't they?
I could have sworn that someone said that Meta was not impacted.
It's interesting because I've in the private browsing and iOS app space, which have had this feature enabled of removing URL parameters for quite some time. I have had anything meta related breaks. Basically, none of the links work because it strips out the unique identifiers. So, are we saying that's not moving into mainstream, or is it?
I will have to do some more digging into it.
Yeah, I would
Because
have thought it was
unfortunately,
both.
yeah, unfortunately, with this post that I decided to print up, all they wrote was with Meta and other ad platforms, you're not able to append click IDs via custom URL parameters.
Yeah, so that would suggest that the unique GCLIDs and the unique meta IDs that are coming through are going to get stripped out.
Yeah, it's just interesting that everyone's focusing on GCLID and not Meta at this point.
Which is weird, but I guess it's the Apple Google battle.
Yep.
Like in the end of Revenge of the Sith or something.
It does make you wonder if
Who has the high ground on this? I think Apple are claiming to have the high ground in this particular scenario.
Well, Apple is claiming to have the high ground because they said that they're protecting you, but at the same time, who asked them to protect us?
Fair point. Fair point.
So
But Apple's Obi-Wan in this scenario then. I think. Do you know what? I've got a question. What does this do to ITP? And maybe I'm being stupid, but it just struck me now. Cookie capping 7 days or 24 hours. Cookies are capped at 24 hours if set alongside known marketing parameters in the URL. Does that mean if GCLID is getting stripped, then the cookie persistence will go back up to 7 days?
That is interesting. The question is, at what point? Because in all of the things that I've seen, it looks like it initially loads with the GCLID on there, and then Safari ships it.
Right, okay. Which is where these workarounds are coming from, I'm guessing.
Yeah. Unless the Safari finds a way to strip it before it actually lands on the next page.
I mean, you think you could do that because they could just identify it in links and change the links, but then it would break the link, I guess.
Yeah. And then that's when companies are going to come after Safari for changing their own website.
Yes, true. So I guess that probably wouldn't be all right.
And you also have to think of the fact that the only way that Apple can do this is the fact that they're tracking you in everything that you do in Safari.
Well, not with this. Not with this. I mean, you have certain things that you look for in the URL parameters and you strip them out. But I mean, it is a valid point because Apple knows who you are and they know what you've clicked because you're
Exactly.
you're logged in on an iOS device. Anyway, the news. Let's keep going.
Yep. Next, there was a ruling that Google does not need to sell Chrome. So that was a big contender. Now, the only thing that is part of the remedies from their monopoly court case is that they will need to start giving data to some of their competitors when it comes to ad and search.
That's an interesting one. I wonder what the ramifications might. I mean, I might be going completely off piste, but I wonder what the ramifications would be for AI. Because we, with Reed the other day, when we were chatting about AI, and obviously AI search is a black box. You don't really get any of the information. I wonder if some of that might be to start sharing some of the AI search information that Google are generating.
Interesting enough, the AI portion is one of the reasons why I think they didn't get slammed as hard as they did, because they actually did call out AI as one of the reasons for not pressing with some of the remedies that the criminal justice department was actually looking for.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
Next in the news, Meta loses privacy case over health data. So ultimately, they were capturing more information than what they were being told, especially when it involved around health. So your Fitbits and stuff. The jury ruled that Meta violated the California Invasion of Privacy Act by collecting sensitive reproductive health data from users of the Flow Period Tracking app via SDKs.
Yeah. Why would I mean? I know why you would want to collect that. I guess because you can sell people. You can use it for advertising. You can sell people products. But for God's sake,
Yeah. I mean, let's be honest. If you see that they don't put that they recently had one, you have an
yeah.
indication of what they're probably going to be looking to buy.
Oh dear.
Yeah.
I mean that. I mean, that's yeah. This is why these legislations exist. It would. It might be frustrating at times, but for God's sake.
Yep. So next, EU laws that are either in effect now or soon. So there were 4 big ones. So first, you got your Data Act, which mandates data portability and sharing across platforms.
Mm-hmm.
Then you have your AI Act, which requires risk classification and transparency for AI systems, including analytical tools. Then you have your Cyber Resilience Act, which imposes strict security and reporting obligations on digital products. And then your CSRD, which expands ESG reporting, including digital data governance. So I just want to package all those four up and we just go into these.
So give me an explanation. I am at a loss.
So the Data Act essentially means that even though these companies are collecting this data about you, which could be on your smart TV, your cloud platform, that they need to make it easily available for you to be able to move that data from one provider to another. So up until I think they said 2030, they can charge you a reasonable at cost fee for being able to give you this data. But after 2030, it needs to be free and you should be able to easily move from, let's say, a Fitbit to an Apple Watch for your health data.
So what kind of data are we talking about here? I mean, surely not like marketing data and information held for site analysis purposes, things like that.
No, it's not necessarily around that. So it's about promoting fair access to data for consumers and businesses, enable data portability to reduce dependency on a single provider, and essentially foster more around competition. So if you could easily move your data from one to another. Because think like this. If people who are on Fitbit, they have a long list of historical data around their fitness health. They're now essentially tied into Fitbit because they don't want to lose that historical data. If you know that you could easily move this to a Garmin or Apple Watch, now you have Fitbit needs to do more to be able to keep you into their platform.
So I like that. I mean, because it was very similar to the banking update a few years ago, where it's the same thing. Is that everybody has to be able to kind of transfer their data around from one bank to another, so that you're not locked in. And wasn't it the same for? It's essentially making it easier to switch. And so if it's things that you consider as core utilities or core services, like banking, and then energy was another one where you had to be able to switch energy, and then mobile phones, that was it, like pack and stack codes and the ability to change mobile provider. Yeah, I like it. I think it's a good idea.
It's also for cloud services. So anything that could easily move things around. So companies have until the 12th of September 2025 to be able to enable this. But once again, they can have it was a switching fee until 2027. After January 2027, then it must be at no cost.
Right, okay.
Mhm.
Interesting. It's going to be interesting from a technical perspective how that might be achieved with the various different systems and different sort of taxonomies and things. But I think it's a good idea overall.
Yep. And any company who does not comply to this will be fined under GDPR rules. Fines. So 20 million euros or 4% of global turnover. But just to give you a little more, because I will admit, I use AI to dig more into this. What type of industries will be impacted by this? So IoT and smart device manufacturers, cloud service providers, automotive and smart mobility, healthcare and medical devices, industrial equipment and smart manufacturing, telecommunications and network services, and consumer electronics.
Is that all? Wow.
Yeah, I know. I think at this point we could safely say if you're producing food, you're safe.
Everybody's regretting. Everybody's regretting making their microwaves Wi-Fi connected now, and their washing machines and things like that. It's like, damn, just created a massive amount of overhead that we're gonna have to deal with now.
Yeah.
Why did we need that toaster that could think?
Why do we make the coffee machine where they can use an app to turn it on so they have hot coffee by the time they get out of bed?
But if only it had just been a dumb kettle. Anyway,
All right. But I mean, the rest of the stuff I think is just very common. So having a risk classification for AI, we need that. So
Mm.
how much of the AI is actually being utilized on your site and making decisions. So you can no longer just say, well, they got this personalized through AI. You need to explain more.
Yeah.
Cyber resilience, making sure that you have proper security. I will admit, I do believe I have been seeing less often people being hacked. And then CSRD, expanding the ESG reporting. So companies are now going to have to actively promote their environmental, social, and governance policies.
Should they have them? I had a really got a couple of really nice books by a guy called David McCandless. Or McCandless, I think it might be the correct pronunciation. And did you ever know about Hans Rosling, the sort of statistician, who wrote a few books as well?
No.
Okay, so basically, David McCandless he does data visualization. And so the whole book is just these really nice visualizations to convey as much information as possible in a visual format. And then Hans Rosling was kind of the father of this whole that whole thing of using data visualization and statistics to convey sort of broad and extremely meaningful ideas. Anyway, the reason I bring it up is there was a David McCandless. It was one of the diagrams. What was the last thing you said? So what was the last thing you mentioned?
ESG.
Yes, cybersecurity. Run through it again.
Oh, so there was risk and classifications in AI, strict security and reporting obligations, and expanding ESG reporting. So their environmental, the
That
social,
was it.
and the
That was
governance.
it. That was it. So there is a fantastic, I think it's a range of visualizations from David McCandless, where he talks about how environmentally friendly certain companies are. And he's got this huge graph so it's really worth looking up. And he's got a website, it probably is on there, where you can look at all these different companies and like how much they try and do greenwashing to claim to be environmentally friendly and socially conscious and so on versus how much they actually are and the difference between. So yes, it just reminded me of that as I was sort of flicking through these two books. So his books are, I think one's called Information is Beautiful and the other one's called Knowledge is Beautiful. And he might have a third one as well, but those are the two that I've got. Yeah, lots of fun.
All right. And the last thing in the news, which I actually had to look up whenever you talked about you wanted to discuss it, the
Yes.
Hanover Ruling.
Yes.
Would you like to start off since this was one for you?
So, and I guess maybe it's to do with the LinkedIn algorithm, but every single second post on my feed at the moment is about this bloody Hanover ruling, which essentially is, and you'll probably have seen them as well, which is GTM has been ruled illegal under GDPR in Germany. Basically, you're not allowed to set it without first getting consent.
Okay, yeah, I was going to get to that one. It's not that they ruled GTM was illegal. They just ruled that you had to get consent to load GTM.
Yes, but every other post that you see on your feed in LinkedIn basically says that GTM, because people love to be what's the word? Alarmist.
Clickbait.
Yeah, clickbait. Love to be alarmist for the purposes of generating clicks. So that's what it is, and you'll have seen it too. So Andrew, given that you looked it up, what are your views?
I mean, one, let's go with what is getting at the basis. One is saying that the reject all is mandatory. You have to be able to easily have it. It has to be as prominent on there as the accept all.
Which is nothing to do with GTM. But and we all
Do
know
with
that that's
GTM.
true.
They also say that consent must be freely given. You must avoid any vague languages around it. But the part that I thought was interesting was they said that GTM must require prior consent before loading. Now, my first thought was a lot of people like to set their consent management in a tag management solution because it makes it easy to switch between tools. So my first thought reading this was, and I hate to even put it out there, does this also mean that tools like TLM and Adobe Launch will also need prior consent before loading?
I mean, yeah, pretty much.
Or did they? Because the one thing I noticed was everything that I found on the Hanover only talks about GTM. They're not talking about other tag management solutions.
Well, and this will come to something I'll come on to in a minute, but yes. So to kind of elaborate on it, because I read through, and ironically it was a Google translated version, but I read through the ruling itself. And I think you've touched on a really good point there, which is that they're only talking about GTM. This ruling relates to a particular company. It relates to one company who was not showing, and then this company and their legal representatives have been presenting the arguments back. And this is where I think there's a problem with it. But basically, this company was originally not providing a reject all option with the same prominence. I think it was accept or manage preferences, which is what a lot of companies used to do. But that was very clearly categorized as being not allowed under GDPR. You had to have equal prominence for a reject all button. That was clarified, probably about a year or so ago. So that was the first thing, and I think that was why they had originally been brought before the court. Then my understanding is reading through, and again, I was just searching for keywords. So I was searching for Google Tag Manager. I was searching for GTM because I was trying to find the bits that related to it because it was a huge document. Then it seems like, and the thing is the court document, when you read through it, it goes in chronological order. So it was, they did this, then they did this, then they did this. So then it seems like they fixed the issue with the reject all button, but then they were setting GTM before consent, but they were also setting tags within GTM before consent that were setting cookies. And then what seems to me like happened is then there was a conflation between GTM and the tags that GTM sets. And basically what it looks like within the ruling is the argument is, but only because this company was setting tags before consent, but the argument was that whoever was bringing the lawsuit had done, or bringing the case, I should say, had done some analysis and had identified that GTM was setting cookies. And then there was a bit of a fuzzy area, and it seemed to say that GTM itself was setting the cookies, which we know that GTM doesn't actually do. It's basically an empty container until you tell it to do something. But this company was setting cookies via GTM. So then the company, I think, took those tags out and switched them off and came back with the argument and said that GTM was only loading before consent because they were using it to load the consent management platform. This is when the ruling came back and said, well, that, so I said, well, no, hang on, let's pull it back. The problem then, once the cookies had been removed, the problem then was that GTM was sending an IP address to Google. So the issue is that when, in order to load GTM from the standard mechanism, you make a call to googletagmanager.com or whatever the URL is. I think it's that. Plus your GTM code. That goes off to Google servers, which are in the US, and it sends a user's IP address in order to retrieve it. Now, that's not a Google thing. that's a web thing. Like if you want to retrieve Recapture or Google Fonts or Adobe Fonts or Adobe Launch or Telium or any third-party service, basically any CDP, for example, you make a call out to those servers to retrieve your assets, and in order to do so, you send them your IP address, because that's how network requests work. The IP address gets sent so that the end server, when it's retrieving the information, understands where the user is, so it knows which version of the code to send them, because different code is required for different geographic regions. To meet different legal requirements. That's an essential service. But that seemed to be the issue, is that the IP address was being sent to Google in order to retrieve GTM. Now, my understanding is that's when the company came back and said, well, we're allowed to do that because an exemption applies. And now we're conflating GDPR and PECR/e-privacy. Because PECR and e-privacy and GDPR really, but PECR and e-privacy says you're not allowed to read from a user's device or write anything to the user's device. So reading from the device, sending the network request to retrieve the information, writing to the device, returning the JavaScript file and writing it onto the browser in order to render it. Says you're not allowed to do that unless one of the exemptions applies. And then GDPR says that IP address is personal data. I don't think it's personally identifiable, because that's a CCPA thing. I've seen a lot of posts saying it's PII, and PII you can't send under GDPR, which I don't think GDPR classifies PII. I think GDPR talks about personal information. It's CCPA that talks about PII. But anyway, whether I'm right or wrong on that, but GDPR says you can't send personal information, and certainly not outside of the EU, which is then the whole sending data between the EU and the US. So you can't do that unless certain exemptions apply. And the exemptions are certainly under e-privacy and PECR. The exemption is that it's required in order to deliver the service to the consumer. That's the exemption. So the argument made was, we should be allowed to load GTM because we're using GTM to load the consent management platform. Consent management platform is required in order to meet legal requirements around consent, around what I am and am not allowed to display and to track. Therefore, because GTM is required to serve the consent management platform, GTM is essential. That was the argument that was returned. And then this was the key bit. The court ruled that GTM was not essential because there is an alternative way to serve a consent management platform. You can write the consent management platform directly into your website, control GTM behind the consent management platform, and therefore you don't need GTM to serve the consent management platform. In fact, you can do it the other way around. And so that's why GTM is non-essential.
My first thought is, would any of these consent management tools try to appeal this on behalf? Because if you think about it, most of the documentation they have is, here's how you do it in GTM, here's how you do it in Adobe Launch. Or do they like the fact that it's no longer going to be done in a tag management solution because now they're more embedded in?
I think from a consent management platform perspective, you would be happy as one of the vendors, because you want to be baked into the website. It makes you hard to remove.
And for OneTrust, I see that being very positive. But by this ruling, does that mean that there is a possibility that certain CMPs can unintentionally become a monopoly because you can't easily change it?
That's one thought, not something that I had considered, but absolutely one thought. My other thought was, given that sending an IP address is the mechanism by which the internet works in order to retrieve content, if we are saying, because the argument that came back from the court was that the reason, basically, and you can read, there's a sentence in there, it says, the only reason that you are serving your consent platform through GTM is because it's the easiest mechanism to do so. And actually, there are more difficult ways of doing a consent management platform, such as hard coding them into your website, that you could do instead of using GTM. Therefore, GTM is not essential. Now, my worry about that is how much of the internet is built on retrieving services from third parties because it is the easiest and most cost-effective way of doing it. And I would argue the entire internet is built on the premise of retrieving services from third parties because it's the easiest and most cost-effective way of doing it. Because if you take that view that something cannot be categorized as essential, not because it's not essential, the way that this company had eventually, and I'm not sticking up for them because first of all, they didn't have a reject all button, and then they did have a reject all button, but they were still setting tags without consent. So this particular company banged to rights and absolutely deserves to be, deserves to be given a slap on the wrist. But if you take the argument, as everybody else seems to be doing on LinkedIn, and all the panic buttons being pressed repeatedly, that something cannot be essential simply because there is a harder way of doing it that is marginally more compliant because you don't have to retrieve it from a third party. What happens to CDNs? So, we have a client who, and there are thousands of them, millions of them probably, who are delivering their website through Cloudflare. And it just so happens that this particular client is delivering their website from a Cloudflare server that happens to be in the US. Well, what about that? What about delivery? What about your order management system and your customer relationship management system? What if they are based somewhere? Or what if they have a distribution network that could be based in Europe or could just connect to the server that's closest and will deliver the fastest response? What happens to Google Fonts? What happens to reCAPTCHA? What happens to Adobe Launch? What happens to Telium?
It's the APIs.
Any API request to any, like, it just jQuery. What happens to jQuery? How many websites have jQuery and they're pulling it from the publicly available CDN, the jQuery CDN? How many libraries are being pulled down from GitHub? So it's because it's Google, and because Google is a marketing and advertising platform. But fundamentally, if you're not allowed to do the easy thing to deliver essential services, because they didn't argue that the consent platform wasn't essential. The consent platform was essential. The argument was you could hard code it. You're only doing it through GTM because it's easy. It's like, well, yeah, cheap too. Like, of course I'm doing it through GTM because it's easy and cheap. That's the point, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to something I was talking with someone earlier. I was like, you know what? Yes, we could easily make this thing that you're talking about. But if it's only 20 pounds to just buy it with someone else doing it, is it worth your time to do it the hard way?
Well, and this is the thing. The answer is no. And thus far, the internet has been built on the premise that the answer is no, and actually, you should do the cheapest and easiest thing. And the way that it's not like, I mean, potentially Google is using these IP addresses. I don't know, and maybe GTM is a huge data collection scam.
And
But they certainly don't say that it is. It isn't advertised as being a mechanism of collecting millions of IP addresses or billions of IP addresses of users from across the world. It's a tag manager. that doesn't collect or store anything unless you tell it to. So maybe I'm being naive. Maybe it is a collection mechanism.
Well, let's go back for a second. Is GTM free?
It is.
So there has to be a reason why it's free. Because I go with the other motto. There is nothing that is actually free. Facebook is free because it is very popular for delivering marketing.
But is GTM free because it is illegally collecting IP addresses from users across the world in direct contradiction of its own documentation? Or is it free because you have to sign into it, it generates identification, it generates identifiers for people who use it, it gives Google a view on all of the websites that it's deployed on, it which is tracking the company, not the end user. Is it free because it is the easiest way for Google to get their other tracking technologies like Google Analytics and Google Ads and Floodlight onto people's websites, and it supports their advertising industry? Is that why it's free?
Or is it option F? All of the above.
It might be. But it opens a can of worms. Is essentially. I mean, I'm not saying that GTM is essential, but I'm saying that if you are using it in a compliant way, then you're not using it to deploy tracking technologies without consent. So essentially, it's an empty box that just retrieves some JavaScript, and then other than that, doesn't do any tracking. Then that could equally apply to any number of things, and it is potentially going to end up being problematic.
And that's where my big concern is, not so much of what they're trying to say around tag management solutions in general, especially GTM. It is the door that it has now opened for other knock-on effects that could be coming down the line.
Well, I mean, there was a ruling in Munich, I believe, that back in 2022 or possibly 23, that Google Fonts wasn't acceptable under GDPR for the exact same reason, because it's Google and it's collecting IP addresses, or not, as the case may be. But the thing is sending an IP address. So we've already had Google Fonts classified as non-compliant.
I do wonder if this is going to lead to a future podcast where we literally just talk about some of these rulings being done by people and being justified by court systems because they don't really understand the technology and it's having a knock-on effect on everything else.
I think they understand the technology. I mean, well, I think they understand it well enough. I can understand the rationale behind it. Like, technically, I guess GTM isn't strictly necessary. Technically, Google Fonts isn't strictly necessary. Technically, neither is jQuery or any of the others, because you could self-host. It's just the worry that I have is what is the real world impact of that going to be? Because everything's just going to get a shitload more expensive.
Yeah. But at the same time, let's go. I'm going to play devil's advocate and go on the absolute worst case scenario on everything. Technically, the house that you live in is not necessary. There is much more difficult options down that you could do to live.
True, but I hope my house isn't illegal. The thing is I can see where the legislation is coming from. I can see why it is what it is. I just feel it opens a can of worms.
Yeah.
But anyway, that aside, the 5 million and 2 LinkedIn posts that I've currently seen about it, which are basically saying panic now and panic quickly. And by the way, whilst you're panicking, I can fix it for you. The other thing is I mean, it's one ruling for one company in Hanover. Yes, it probably does set a precedent, and at some point we might be in a position where we might have to put GTM behind a consent management platform, or the other option that all of these posts have been touting, where they're saying panic now and come and buy a service from me, is serving the GTM container from your own server-side GCP instance, which then means that the IP address isn't being transferred to the US or to Google, it's being transferred to your instance of GCP, or Azure or whatever hosting platform you happen to host your server-side GTM instance on. So there is an option around it anyway, which is just self-host GTM and self-host Google Fonts and self-host jQuery and self-host reCAPTCHA and all of this other stuff, which is my point. Which is like, where does it stop, and at what point does the internet start becoming a paid service when everybody has to self-host everything?
Yeah. No, I agree. There's going to be plenty of ways of making this where it's no longer going to be need a panic. And it's one of the things, I never panic over anything that comes across that is recent. I wait and see what the actual long-term rulings are going to be.
Well, exactly. I mean, look, we had, what was it, 2018 GDPR came in, and only really very recently have we started to see in the UK anyway that the ICO has started to clamp down on it. The big companies have been having fines for years, you know, your Metas and your Googles, but only very recently has the ICO started to clamp down. And the big one was precisely the thing that was in this lawsuit, which is the lack of prominence of a reject all button. So it's stuff like that that's you know, that's been going after, where it's like things that are super visible, like the fact that you don't have a reject all button, and they're still massive companies. I did a review not too long ago. There were still huge companies that don't even have a banner, or they put the banner in but they fire tags anyway, and you know, and I think that's where the hammer's going to fall. Not necessarily my view anyway, and then, you know, don't take it as legal advice, but my view is that it's going to be a long time down the track before anybody starts getting prosecuted for having GTM, so long as their GTM instance isn't being used to track people without consent.
Yeah. I will say, and this is going to be my own personal opinion. At first, I was really thankful around GDPR. I thought it was actually a really good thing, giving power to the consumer. But in the recent couple of weeks, I will say I am done and tired of the cookie consent banners. There is an app I use nearly every single day, and every day I am now being served, do you wish to accept cookies? I'm
Yeah.
like, I just accepted it yesterday, and the day before that, and the day before that, and the day before that. Stop it.
Is this on your phone by any chance?
On my phone.
An Apple phone by any chance?
Yes.
Are the cookies that are being set to maintain your consent choice being deleted by Apple?
It is something I'm wondering, because it does seem to be every 24 hours.
I bet it wouldn't be doing it on Android. And
But
that's, you know, I do. I think Apple and ITP. My view has always been with that it's a tightrope before, you know, before it starts to make them functionally useless, like the browser. It's going to be interesting to back onto iOS 26. It's going to be interesting to see how that plays out, because the way it's played out in WhatsApp, for example, for me, is that anybody who shares a WhatsApp link with me, a Facebook link on WhatsApp saying, go and look at this thing on Facebook, and I press it, the link doesn't work because my phone strips all of the identifiers out, and so it won't take me through to the link. And I know why that is. It's because I'm on an iPhone and I'm too lazy to go and change my privacy settings. But but fundamentally, like that's going to start to piss everyone off, surely.
Yeah. I mean, I went onto a news website and I hate the fact that, oh, must have hit the wrong button because now I can't see this social media post that they embedded onto this page, which means I'm getting a worse experience as a customer.
Yeah. But
So I'm just
I'm
tired
more-
of the.
I'm not
trying to
secure
keep
of
it in there now.
Yeah.
All right.
No, I know.
Well, let's start wrapping up. I just wanted to cover off one thing not in the news. Camp London is
Oh,
just around
yeah.
the corner.
27th?
27th of September.
27th of September, yeah.
So I know I'm going to be there. You're going to be there.
I am indeed.
We have a colleague at work who's also going to be going there. So are you ready? Are you presenting anything?
I have no idea. I am a man who I do like to plan ahead, but sometimes I like to leave things with a frisson of danger and a certain element of mystery. Yes, I'm sure I will do some sort of presentation, but I'm not going to plan anything. I'm just going to turn up and talk.
I am a little bit on the opposite side. I had planned what I want to talk about. I had known what I want to talk about for about a month and a half already. But at the same time, I have not put a single slide together yet. I have some pieces of paper with my plan of what I want to do.
I'll probably, yeah. I mean, in all seriousness, in the week running up to it, I'll probably put some slides together. But yeah, I'm going to think about it closer to the time.
But yeah, so for me, it will be what have I learned about data layer schemas in this last year.
That is a good one.
So
That's a good one.
So I'm going to put together a slide deck on that and look forward to discussing, because there's a lot of things I did not realize that you could do with it. And I'm coming up with more and more unique ways of being able to create a schema that you could use, especially for a global company where you can have a single file and it could just roll out for everyone. So now you don't have to update one instead of updating multiple files.
Sounds brilliant. And I think what I will do is, I mean, just off the top of my head, but I've been having a lot of fun with automation, and I think fun with automation sounds like a good topic title. So I think I'll probably do that. And then I might do something on ObservePoint. I've not done anything. I've done stuff on ObservePoint at ObservePoint Edge, as you know, as you do when you happen to be at the ObservePoint conference. You do talks on ObservePoint, but I think it'd be nice to do a couple of talks on ObservePoint. There are some really good use cases that we've done with ObservePoint recently around. Particularly on like compliance dashboards at scale, and around using it in the validation process. So like rolling out a particular tag to 200 websites and then using ObservePoint to validate that the tag's there in staging. So like doing script swap outs and getting it to check the staging environment and stuff like that. So I might do one on ObservePoint as well.
It would be interesting that we almost have like a tie over. Like if I go first, then I say, and you need to go talk with Matt, because then you could take this concept and he's going to talk about how you can use it with ObservePoint to make it even more powerful.
There you go. Although I'll have to come to your session on
Cliffhanger.
I'll have to come to your session on data-led schemas, because I think I introduced you to the joys, but you've taken it beyond. I'll have to attend your session for data-led schemas, because although I think it was me that introduced you to the joys of data-led schemas, you've now taken them into hitherto unknown realms, unknown heights. So I'd look forward to seeing that.
I was going to say, you don't have to waste your time on a Saturday to come listen to me talk. I can give it to you anytime at work. So that's going to be fun. But yeah, no, I'm absolutely looking forward to Camp London, because it was the original. It's where it all started by Peter O'Neill many, many moons ago. And I remember sitting with him in a bar when he first talked about doing this. And I just thought, okay, you starting a unconference because nobody will allow you to speak at a conference because of your accent. Almost like saying that I really want peanuts, so I'm going to buy a Boeing 747. There has to be a better way. But to be fair, it is taken off. I would never have imagined back then the way it came to now.
Was that a Boeing 747 joke there about it taking off?
It wasn't meant to be. It was just the first plane that came in my mind. But yeah. Well, I believe we've made a good wrapping up point now.
I
So,
agree.
Matt, any final thoughts before we wrap it up?
My final thoughts are: it is currently 11:10 and I am very tired.
Yes, it is 11:10. I'm also extremely tired. I know
Let's
that
have those as our final thoughts.
me up in a minute, but I was going to say, when it comes to requirements, if the developer is coming to you asking you what should we be tracking as a non-business stakeholder, the process has failed.
Indeed.
All right. Well, Matt, thank you so much. And for the 1 or 2 listeners who have made it this far, thank you for listening. If you have any questions, just let us know.
Cheers.
Cheers.
I've received a message.
Yep.
It's feed the cat. Feed the cat wet food. It's all we have. Yeah, it's under. Oh, it's under there. Okay. So, so he needs his bedtime. Okay, good. Yeah, feed it. Basically, feed him. Okay. There we go. So, she really tried with the written message, but I'm too dense to understand what I was being asked to do.
Yep.